September 13th, 1984. This is Joe Todd, an interview with Mrs. Ada Kerns and Mr. Claude Cope, and your brother and sister, right?
Right.
Good. Ma'am, where were you born?
Down in Clinton, Custer County.
And when's your birthday?
January 21st, 1903.
1903. Sir, where were you born?
I was born at Gate. It was on a farm there.
Okay. And when's your birthday?
March the 20th, 1906.
Who's your father?
Hmm?
Who's your father?
Cliff Cope.
Clifton,
Yeah, Clifton.
CC.
And your mother?
Florence Cope.
What was her maiden name?
Sims.
Sims?
S-I-M-S.
Yeah. Were they from Oklahoma?
No, well, yes. Originally, though, they came from Missouri.
Missouri.
Now, wait a minute. Dad came from Missouri and Mother from down in Waxahachie, Texas. They came in the early days there in Custer County, their folks.
They come here to Homestead?
Father came out and bought a relinquishment
Okay.
into
Down up here by Gate?
Gate,
Okay.
southwest of Gate.
Yeah. What year did he come here?
1902.
1902. So you were born down by Clinton?
Yes.
Okay. When did you all move down to Clinton?
Well, that's where her folks lived, you see, and well, my mother's folks and my father's folks lived on a half section, one on one quarter and one on the other, and Mother and Dad were married there, and you see, they hadn't moved out here. He just came out and bought this relinquishment, and of course had to make the dugout and things like that, but that was why I was born there. You see, Mother was an only child, and of course, when she was pregnant, grandmother wanted her with her, and that's the reason I was born there.
Yeah.
And then you see, after they had moved out here, when he came along.
Okay. As kids, what kind of chores do you do on the farm?
Milk. Gathering in the wood.
Yes. Well,
Getting in the
with
water.
him, we always had stock. Of course, he was Dad's right-hand man. And with me, I lived on the farm and then milked cows and carried in the wood. And grandfather was a man that got up at 4 o'clock, and he would wake me up at 4 o'clock, and I'd go in and shake that old stove.
What was his name?
Jack Sims, or John Sims.
John Sims.
Uh-huh. And with the old majestic range, and start the fire, and then later when they'd get up, and of course we always had biscuits and cornbread, my grandmother being from the South.
Were any of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
No, they're great-grandfathers.
Okay. Ever hear any stories about them?
Oh, yes, but I've forgotten most of them. In no particular stories, only, of course, how hard it was and how they, I think most of our grandfathers were, on both sides, were shoe cobblers and made shoes for.
Yeah. What were their names? Remember?
Well, no, not the grandfathers. SS was Grandfather Cope, Sampson.
Something.
And I don't know Grandfather Sims, what his folks' name was.
I can't call it now.
What kind of games did you two play as children on the farm?
Well, we usually had horses and rode horses, and well, of course, at school we played ante over and sticks and things like that. and marbles.
That's about too far from here.
Yeah. What kind of toys y'all have? Did you make your own toys or?
We didn't have toys. Only when we lived with my grandparents, they had money and they bought me most everything that I wanted. But I'd rather have cats. I'd play with the cats and the dogs and things like that. I'm an outdoor person. And my sister liked the dolls and things like that. But of course, they had dogs and hunted rabbits and trapped.
Yeah, we done a lot of trapping on as kids, I did.
And that was our spending money. The boys had set traps and we'd get on the horses and go ride the trap roll. And
What would you trap?
Skunks, possum, the majority of the
How do you deal with a skunk after you trap him?
he was a good marksman.
You sure don't want to get close to him.
Oh, he'd get it on us. Yeah, when we'd bring him in to skin him, we'd get it on us.
And they would take that skunk grease and render it and use it in medication. You see, they take that skunk oil and turpentine and make poultices for pneumonia and things like that.
When you got that smell on you, how'd you get rid of it?
Well, we used vinegar and what else?
Tomatoes, but we didn't have tomatoes.
We generally always just come home from school. My dad bought furs and stuff, and he'd buy these skunks that wasn't skinned, and we and then this Billy Browning had bought it there for him, and we got skin for him.
Expendable.
He'd give us a quarter to skin them. Well, that was money for us kids. That's a quarter of skunk. Sometimes we'd have 8 or 10 at night to skin after we got home from school.
How old were you?
Oh, I'll imagine 8, 10, something like that.
What kind of house y'all lived in at the gate?
Well, when we first moved out here, it was just a 2-roomed.
Now, when the first house was a half dugout and a half soddy. And
do you remember that house?
not too much, no. Only what the parents have told us. And it was small, and they used canvas for the windows. And they put boards up and then sod on it for the roof. And of course, that was extremely warm and, of course, cool. And then he built a 2-room house, a board house, and I think he used footboards. And then, what sort I want to use, the cracks.
The clapboard? No,
The
Strip.
about 2 inch.
Board and batten?
For the cracks.
Yeah. Is that what they call board and batten?
Well, no, I didn't hear that term.
I didn't ever either.
Yeah, I know there's a term for it, but
Yes, I can't think of it now, but we like to died. You see, we moved out of this soddy and it was warm and comfortable, and you move into a house that's just footboards. I don't even remember much in the inside. It was just weather stripped on the outside. And the weather was so extreme, you see. We had, well, of course, we didn't know whether it was pneumonia or not, but sore throats and coughs and colds, and had hard luck. Of course, our beds were made of straw, or that is corn stalks and things for the ticking, was our mattress. What we would, well, we didn't have, I don't know whether they had springs or not, I don't remember that. And then they would use feather beds. Take the down from ducks and on top of that. And then when it get extremely cold, one year that Mother and Father killed enough ducks, and now you see they just picked that down off of the fine feathers. And to make a feather bed, with the exception of one, Mother had shot a goose out on the lake there, and she swam her horse out and got it, and they had that one duck feather goose feather in it. Other than that, they got enough to make another one. Well, when they get extremely cold, we'd all get in one bed and sleep on one feather bed and then cover with the other one. And I know Father had a meat market in Inglewood, and Mother was there alone, and they hauled coal from Inglewood, Kansas. And she was running out, and she went out. Of course, sagebrush and cow chips was our main fuel, and she would pick up green bones and things like that. And you see, it was a small house, and we just had a little topsy stove. At first, it was just 2 plates, and then the oven was up in the stovepipe. And that was where we had, that's all the heat we had. And it was pretty hard.
But the sod house was warm.
The sod house was, you know, the dugout. It was built in the side of a bank. And he dug back in there and then built up, what was probably 3 feet of
Yeah, probably might have been 3 foot.
You ever consider moving back into it when it got cold?
Well, I was too small, and
We moved out, we stayed out.
Where did y'all start to school?
I went to school with my grandparents. You see, I was the first grandchild. And, of course, there was only about 18, 20 months difference between me and my sister. Well, of course, and my grandparents just lived across the road from an old Cheyenne Indian cloud chief. And he would kid them and say, go to Beaver County and eat jackrabbits. And they, of course, well, that's the reason I was born there. My sister and I were born in Custer County. And I stayed a lot with my grandparents because they, you see, well, Mother with 2 little tiny babies out here in this country. Of course, Mother nursed her babies. And you see, I stayed with my grandparents quite a bit, and when Mother brought, they came in covered wagons, of course, and brought my sister with them, and then she had these 2 boys. My father delivered him. Mother got sick, and he was going to go several miles to get a relative to come, and she said, no, you don't have time, so he delivered him, and then a neighbor, my other brother, after. You see, they were born here in Beaver County.
Did you know Cloud Chief?
Oh, yes, I knew Cloud Chief.
Tell me about it. What was he like?
Oh, they were lovely neighbors. They just lived across the road from my grandparents. And, of course, they were Indians. They had their arbor where they stayed in the summertime, made of willows. And then their teepees. They lived in these teepees. Now, they had a 2-room house, and they had a bed in there. I never saw any bedding on it, just the beds did, and springs. And, of course, they had one of these long pot-bellied stoves. And because we would go over and stay with them, Grandmother would go out to help my grandfather pull corn. He released Indian land near Bear Creek, and they'd let us go over there. But, and they would, we would never eat because the Indians, well, they ate dogs and they ate dead animals that had died, you know, poisoning or things like that. And we knew that, and we wouldn't eat. And they would take and put corn on top of this stove, and of course it was just as clean as could be, the heat and everything, and parch it and grind it and try to get, and he would come over and he had a little half-a-gallon porcelain bucket with a tin top, and he'd come over and Grandpa would give him milk. And then if they run out of bread, my grandmother, of course, was from Texas, and it's cornbread and biscuit. He'd come over if they run out of bread, and he got any whiskets, he'd call them. And Grandmother would get, but we were good neighbors, and they were just lovely. They tried to get us to eat, but we wouldn't eat with them.
When he'd come in over at their place, they'd gang in over there, you know. Well, he wouldn't get water out of the cistern. He'd go to the well because it's jiffy, it's kind of jiffy. But he wouldn't use it out of the cistern. But as soon as they left, now they'd use it out of the cistern for their own use. Yeah. But he wouldn't.
Was he Chief of the Cheyenne?
Well, the cloud chief, is,
His name, Claude.
they would go once a month, you know, and get their allotment. And they'd live well the first week, and then it just tapered off in the fourth week while they were out. And those Indians, you see, would the thing they prized most was what they would give their friends. And he had a wagon and a team of horses. What were they? White, weren't they?
I don't remember.
And he kept them a long time. And then one time after they'd been to a powwow, he come back with a buggy and one horse, a black one horse. He had changed. And he had given his away, and then some chief had given him his.
What kind of house your grandparents lived in?
Oh, they had a nice frame house, 2-story house, and they had, you see, built a house when they came to Custer County, and then they had built another one. And it was nice, and had fireplace in it. They had rugs on the floor, and well, everything nice in their home, but it was quite different out here.
Tell me about your grandmother's kitchen.
Oh, grandmother's kitchen, it was large. And they had a curtain drawn here and a bathtub over here. And then over here was the majestic range, and she had a little cook table. And there's where I learned my ABCs. I'd get up on a chair when Grandma was opening cans or cooking, and where I learned to bake. I've always liked to bake cakes, and I baked, she taught me, and I'd make a plain cake and put chocolate frosting on it. She'd go to, they were Baptists, and they'd go to church to these Baptist dinners. And she took this cake and told them that I was only probably 5 or 6 years old, and I'd baked it, and boy, after the praise I got, and I'm going to bake cakes the rest of my life.
What would you help your grandmother do in the kitchen?
Oh, I cooked and washed dishes, and I'd get up, of course, and make and I carried, now, this was just a kitchen. It was a large kitchen, and they had their wash bench over here where you'd come in and wash your hands and face. And they had a cistern, of course. The water was extremely hard. And then they had a nice big dining room, and where china covered in there. And they had a closet where they bought all of their sugar by the 100 pounds and things like that. And my grandfather always had to have his special drinks. That man always had beer and all kinds of liquor, and I never saw him topsy in my life. He'd just get up in the morning, have his toddy, and if he wanted that, and that was it. Yeah. And grandmother made her jellies and jams and canned fruit, things like that. But it was a large, nice kitchen. It would have been larger than our whole house when we came to the beaver county.
You do much plowing as a young boy?
Yeah.
You plow with horses or mules?
Both.
Both. Which do you prefer?
Well, mix them up. Well, as a kid, we had a big old team horse, all weighed about 1,800 apiece. We just tie a young mule or a horse, whatever, on the side of them and go to work.
How come you'd have a horse and a mule?
Well, that old team, I'd tie a young mule onto the side of him. Well, that mule didn't run around in front of him. He might do it once, but he didn't do it the second time. That old horse got him. He'd grab him by the nape of the neck. He'd make him squeal. And we could do whatever we pleased with these old team, but old big team.
What kind of horses were they?
Well, they got me.
What breed was old Simon?
Clyde, they wasn't Clyde.
No, they weren't Clydesdale.
I don't know.
Perchins, was it?
Must have been Perchins. I don't know. For sure. But us kids done the majority of the farm work.
How much plowing could you do in one day? How many acres?
Oh. Well, like, I don't know what you'd call a day. We get up and milk 18, 20 cows before we went to the field. Get the horses in, harness in, and then by the time drive 5 miles down to the field. We never stopped for dinner when it got time for us to do chores. We had to be at home to do the chores.
So So when you got through, how many acres did you have plowed?
Some days you do worse, more than others.
What kind of crops did you raise?
Capricorn, maize.
Raise any cotton?
No, not up there. My granddad did down where he lived.
What about broomcorn?
Yeah, Dad raised some broomcorn, but he didn't raise much of it on account of what I couldn't work in it.
You could.
It freaked me out.
Yeah.
Dad was the same way.
Did you work in it?
No. No. Oh, I might have gone out some. Now my mother, when they first came out here, they raised Capricorn. You see, they broke sod and planted in that Capricorn. And Mother worked out. She taught Capricorn, and she'd leave me at home, and I still could cook. I could make cornbread and cook beans, and I was a kid, you see, and I could take care of the other kids and get their dinners for them.
What is the difference between a sod plow and a regular walking plow?
Oh, there's a blade on the sod plow was more flatter, and then on the turn, where the sod come up and turned over, it wasn't solid on the sod plow. It's gaps in it like cuts, you know.
What were the gaps for?
Well, it didn't do away with weight and then.
And cut the sod. They can cut the sod. You know, they wanted it all a certain length.
That's to build the sod houses?
Yes.
Well, most of the sod houses was just a straight knife went down in and turned like this, just a U shape.
It was.
And they set it to go so deep, and that would cut the sod, but it wouldn't turn it. It just cut it, and then you had to cut it across whatever way you wanted. Some of them would turn and go the other way with it, and most of them just cut it with a shovel.
How wide would the sod be that they used to build a sod house?
Oh, about most of them hard houses is anyway 2 foot.
So it would be what? So wide?
Well, they'd lay that like this, and then they'd cross it, you see.
Okay.
Every time. So it didn't make no difference, just so that the crack didn't meet. They lay it this way, and then they lay this way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And that all tallied out, and that.
And the windows were deep in that. You see, you could sit in the windows. There was.
Oh yeah. And the walls just about. They must have been a good 2 foot.
Well, that'd be good. There would be good insulation.
Oh, it was. They were warm.
After you built the house, what did you use the sod house for?
Oh, we lived in.
Oh, after you built the wooden house, the frame
Oh,
house.
It just went to roof.
It just
I don't know,
deteriorated.
cut the roof off of it or not.
Well,
I
probably.
know we played down there. Kids.
What kind of mischief you two get into?
Not very much. We knew better than to get into mischief.
Our parents were strong disciplinarians. No, we.
How big was the school you went to?
Man, what?
How large? This school that I started to was Chapel Hill there in Custer County, and it was a one-room school, and I imagine there were 50 or 60 there, one teacher. And we had double seats and the pot-bellied stove, and then we had the long bench. But when my mother went to one of their first schools there, it was a dugout, and they split cottonwood logs for them to sit on, and had a fireplace down in there to heat. Then later they built this frame building when I come along.
How far did you two go through school? How many years?
I have college, and he has high school.
Okay. What college did you go to?
I went to Panhandle. I started teaching when just my senior year. I had some extra hours or credits, and I took the teacher's examination and passed it and got a school. And then I went to summer school at Panhandle and finished out my high school and graduated with my class in 23. And then I worked out my college. I teach in the winter and go to summer school until I got my life elementary. And that's,
Where were you going to college? At
I went to Panhandle, then I went to Northwestern and Teachers.
At Alva.
There, I got my teacher certificate from there.
Did you board out at Alva, or do you live on campus?
Well, at a private home.
Oh, so you boarded,
Yes.
and you got your life certificate in 23, you say?
Oh, no. I started teaching in 22 and 23, a little rural school. And you see, I took the examination here in Beaver. We had to take an examination to get a 3rd grade certificate. That's what you needed to teach in the rural country, rural. And I taught on that for, I believe, 4 years until, well, maybe it's 2 years, and then I could take 2 more subjects, I think, or 3, and get 2nd grade. And then I taught on 3rd and 2nd grade until I got my life elementary, and then that meant that I could teach in the city schools. And I started teaching in Gate then.
How large was Gate?
Oh, it is much larger back there. You see, Gate there's been 2 towns. The old town is a mile east of there. And then when the railroad came in 1912, they moved up on the hill. They moved their buildings and everything. And it was much larger than it is now, because we had 3 grocery stores there, and the clothing stores, and 3 hotels and rooming hotels, and the rooming house.
Wasn't much population.
Well, the thing is, there were more children in a family, and there was a family on nearly every quarter section.
That's where they come in. There's so much more. There's more quickly settled out in the country.
But now we had, there was the Cooks and the Maffetts and the hotel down there by Miss Douglas's.
Yeah,
And
the hotels was busy. When I was a kid,
well, we didn't have motels.
No, that's right.
And blacksmith shop and a printing office and pool hall and 2 or 3 cafes and drugstore and a lodge building. Much more there than it is now.
Was it mainly a farming town?
Yes.
The main crops raised around there, Capricorn and maize?
Yes. My father-in-law raised the first wheat that was grown there. But it was wheat after it got started, and of course it was cattle quite a bit.
Yeah.
Ranchers.
Did you all raise wheat when you were at home?
Oh, yeah. After, we was a pretty good sized kid.
Yeah, almost.
Well, I was 13 because I pitched wheat out on header barge when I was 13 years old.
Tell me about that, working on header barge.
Ain't much to do on it.
How does it work? What does the header barge do?
They cut it with a header and it come up an elevator up into the barge. Well, then when you got your load on, you went to the stack and fetched it off on the stack, and the stacker stacked it.
Horse drawn?
Yeah.
How many horses pulled the header barge?
6.
6?
Dad always put 8 on, though. He'd put 8 on and drive.
How big was the header barge?
Well, it was, 16 by 12, I suppose. Just guessing about 16 by 12.
And how big? Oh, go ahead.
Well, now they had different headers.
Well, the barge was made on a slope. The backside was up high here, and it sloped up here to it, and then over here, and this so it wouldn't kick that grain over the top, and then you load that up and build it up.
The horses pushed it, didn't they?
The header, yeah. Yeah, they pushed
They did,
it.
and they didn't pull it.
Oh, they pushed
They were hooked back here.
The platform went across, and then there was a beam come back through here, and then they sat right in on each side of this beam, and then you had to swing them. You could swing either one of them and turn them. And them horses learned that. They'd step over sideways when they were making that turn.
How big were the stacks when you stacked the wheat?
Oh, it just depends on
How big you wanted to make them. Because they would make them large. And then when the thrashing machines come in, you see, and well, they was two ways. They would haul these, they shocked them before the header. They had binders, and then they would shock them, and then they would haul those in what was it, about 6 bundle wagons that they'd have, and they'd go out and load them in the field, and then they'd drive up and throw them on the belt, and that'd go into the thrashing machine. Or then when the headers came along, and they stacked some of them instead of hauling them from the field. And then when the headers came along, they would stack them. And tell them about this header barge.
Dad bought one of these header barges that it had left. Just a barge set on out of it, and then it had a frame up at the side here. And you throw that in gear, and it'd take that barge up the top, and then you can dump it and then tip. Well, them's when you put them in the big stacks.
Okay.
You see, the barge was sloped, where it came in, you see, so they had dumped it on the stacks, and that's when you made your big stacks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does the binder do?
The binder just goes along and cuts it, and then it ties it in bundles.
The shocks?
No.
No, it's just a bundle.
It's a bundle.
About that big around.
Okay.
And you go along and pick those up and take them over here and shock it.
Let it dry out.
Dry out, you see. And then when they got ready to harvest, they'd go out in the field, and there would be 2, usually 3 on a wagon. One would drive, and then they'd pitch these bundles up, and then they'd take them to the
Generally 2 today.
the team.
Well, it just depends. Sometimes just one.
How many men in the harvest crew?
Oh, about, it's what you were doing. I cooked for a cook shack for thrashing. My husband was managing the separator and the engine. You see, we had the steam engine and the separator, and they had a cook shack. And I run that, and I was feeding 20, 24.
What would you cook for them?
Oh my, meat and potatoes and gravy, and I baked the bread, and I usually had a dessert, pie or cake. But they ate.
Yeah.
That's hard work.
Yes, and you get up in the morning, you see them make their breakfast. You'd get up at 4 o'clock and have their breakfast so they could get to the field.
You'd eat a breakfast.
Ham and eggs and bacon and eggs and biscuits and
Now, would all the
gravy.
neighbors get together and help each other during wheat harvest?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, they'd swap work backwards and forth.
they had to.
A lot of them, when they thrashing bundles and stuff, some of them teams would stay with the rock from the time it started till it finished up. Just for working for other farmers.
Now, would one farmer own the thresher and
Yeah.
all the
Yes,
neighbors use it?
usually one did.
Okay. Now, would you bring the thrasher to the neighbors? The neighbors
To
go
their field.
Okay.
And then you'd have this great big straw pile, you see. They'd take the grain out in wagons. And, they thrashed the Capricorn that way because I know Mother would go, they had to haul it to Inglewood, you see, about 20 miles. And they had the double deckers, did they call them, or top sideboards?
Tip-top sideboards.
Tip-top sideboards. And they'd put 4 head on each wagon, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then when they had to ford the Cimarron, they'd get up there, and Mother and Father both would have teams, and if they got in trouble, you see, they'd take a team from one wagon to the other to go across that Cimarron because it was bad.
What would you do with the straw pile?
Oh, that's where that was one of the most valuable things. In the winter, you could turn your cattle in, and they'd eat that straw, you see.
Eating the green wheat, well then they've got to have fillings, so they'd eat the wheat straw. Wheat straw is good filling when you're feeding cake and stuff like that. It's just good as water.
My grandfather really fed he had cotton, and he'd feed the cotton seed, the whole seed. And then they'd go to this stack. He worked on the XIT Ranch up here. That was a big layout during the Dust Bowl days and the Depression.
What did he do on the ranch, on the XIT?
What do you do?
Well, no, what did he do on the XIT, on the ranch?
Well, he was just one of the...
Hands that work cattle, put up hay.
How big was that ranch?
Oh, something over 100,000 acres. So it covered some territory. Well, it reached from pretty near to Level to down in Mulcaine, that way, and then the other way, I don't remember now. Just
So it was in Oklahoma also?
Oklahoma and Kansas.
Yeah. The headquarters was in
Topeka.
Topeka.
Well, Maple Hill, rather, is really where they lived. It's Maple Hill, Kansas.
Okay.
There was where their feedlots and stuff was.
No, I saw a monument to the XIT in Dalhart, Texas, I think.
Oh, there was down there, of course, that, well, you know more about that than I do.
What is that there?
You see, the XIT, there is a ranch in
Yeah, there's an
Texas.
XIT down there, but it don't hook up with this.
Oh, there's two different.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I was thinking of the XIT in Texas.
No.
It's XIT.
Okay.
XI.
How did they get
Well,
along?
it's really XI. And then when it split up, there's three boys. When the old man died, they split that up after about 2 years. And part of it, the south part was XIT. There's where the XIT comes in. It's really XI was what started it. It was all started back.
Well, how'd they get along with two XIT ranches? Was there much trouble between the two ranches? The two XITs?
Yeah, there wasn't no hookup at all.
There wasn't?
No,
Okay.
one of them's in Texas, and
Yeah.
the other one's up there in Kansas.
Okay. Okay.
See, they fed up there with their cattle. They used to, when Roberts run it, he would buy calf corn, maize, and the head, and feed it to his cattle in the wintertime. And then Adams brought in then with him, so they put in the feedlot in Topeka, not Topeka, Maple Hill. They shipped the cattle in, they'd run them down through here, and then they'd ship up there for the long grass.
Ever had many big cattle drives in this part of the country?
No, there's nothing, only just drive up to Plains, what was it, about 15 or 18 miles. We drove 3,300 head of weaning calves up there to ship them to Maple Hill.
How far is that?
About 18 miles.
18 miles. Okay. What was your first job after you left?
That's right.
After you left home.
After you left home?
Oh,
Or have you always been rancher, farmer?
oh, I've done a little bit of everything. Heavy equipment, dozer, drag line. See, I've worked in 16 different states.
And you went through, what year did you graduate from high school?
Back in, God, I don't
Well,
know.
I graduated in 23, so yours was about 26 or 8, somewhere in there, huh?
I don't remember just what.
After high school, what did you do?
Well, worked here and there and everything. I worked on that government job out at Provo, South Dakota. That big government job out there.
What?
Ammunition storage, and there's over 300 mile of railroad laid in that strip.
Was that,
300 acre loops.
was that the PA project up there?
No, that's a contract.
Contract?
Mm-hmm.
What'd you do up there?
I run a dozer a while, and run a side boom. Yeah.
They went out, the boys for a year or two would go north with the harvest and shock wheat.
Shock wheating and combine, thrashing.
Thrash it.
did they move that thresher?
Well, they have this engine. They just hook on get to the separator to the engine and just go from one place to another.
So the steam engine?
Yeah.
You see, they had their water wagon and their coal wagon there, and
Do you all remember World War One?
well, yes, so I do some. Especially one thing I remember, we were raising money for the American Red Cross, and we had a community sale. Each one would bring in stuff. I was just a kid, but I took in a cake and chickens and well, just anything that you had. And we had a street sale there in Gate. The 64 goes right through Gate, and they had an old red rooster there. Someone had brought in. And they sold him, and they said, well, what do you do with him? Sell him again. That rooster brought $125. And then they would take him to Englewood, Kansas, and to Ralston and places, you know. And they were raising money for the Red Cross. And we were making, now I never did knit much. I was too much of a kid. But they had the Red Cross work, you know, making bandages and knitting for the soldiers.
What about Armistice Day? What'd you all do on that day?
I expect I worked.
Well, was that when they had one of those celebrations there and burned one another's coats and things there in Main Street?
Oh, let's see.
Or election, they did that on election. All right.
When that guy left town, they said this guy was out there speaking, sent down and got him. Was that?
I hadn't thought of that for a long time.
Yeah, you know,
That's 1980.
he was going home, and he had to go home, and this guy was there giving a speech, and he had the law to go get him, bring him back.
Well, there was a car drove through Main Street there on the highway, and they didn't stop and salute the flag, and they went and got them and made them come back and salute the flag. You're here at this sale.
Well, that's just the kind of a guy that's giving a talk, you know.
Do you remember Statehood Day?
Oh, no.
That was
You see, I wasn't very old.
Yeah, almost 5. Yeah, 1970. Okay, what about the Depression, 1930s? How'd that affect you all?
Well, he was up there on the ranch, working up there. And at a home, we managed. I was teaching school, and I'd been getting $100 a month as a teacher. And well, this was the Depression. That's when they killed the cattle. And one school board, our neighbor came in one day and he said, we're going to have to lay off a teacher and move up the grades. I taught 7th and 8th. So they decided to give me the 6th grade, and that'd make me 6th, 7th, and 8th, an average daily attendance of 42. And I said, well, if you're going to give me the 6th grade, you give me more money. And he said, no, we're cutting you 50%. I just get $50. And then, and I had this 42, you see, and I coached basketball and track and tennis. And they got to, at first, I could get on this $50 warrant. The bank at Moreland, I believe it was, that would discount it 4%, and I'd get money. And then it got to where nobody would take it. Even the grocery store wouldn't take it for groceries. And I clerked in the store from 8 in the morning until 10 of the evening, and that way, you see, I could get the staples. Yeah. My mother had cows, so we had cows. We canned beef as they shoot down the cattle, where we could cut off a quarter beef and can it if we wanted to. And we survived on it. And the dust, when it came in, that made it bad, because you get up in the morning, there's just a little white place on the pillow where your head had been, and all the rest was just brown with dirt. We took down our curtains, we rolled our rugs, and but my husband was working, was a mechanic, And he had work, but no money. And of course the trains was running. We'd always go to the post office at 7 o'clock. Farmers would come in and sit there, and some of their shoes were wired up with baling wire and all, and their clothes patched. They told my husband, the inspector, he said, "Earl, if you don't get you some new overalls," said, "you've got to do it because you've got too many patches on there. It's dangerous." And they'd sit out there and joke. And I don't know, but what we really enjoyed one another more. We were closely knit. We'd have our little bridge clubs and play bridge and entertaining.
Nobody had anything. They didn't
And
have
we were
nobody
all
had
the
any
same.
money.
Yeah. Describe a dust storm.
Oh.
Well, now, he and I are going to see it different. He was up here on the ranch. But it was the most beautiful, just as pretty as today, as the sun was shining bright and clear. And we had been out all day nearly. And we had, of course, we had a radio. And I went in the house, I guess, about, I believe it was around 3 or 4 o'clock. And the radio was on, and it said, "Is Dodge City. We're going off of the air," but they didn't say why they were going off of the air. Well, we went out, and, but when this rolled in, I was in the house, and my husband was outside. And it just rolled in. It was just as black as midnight. In fact, he was out, and he felt the house, and by feeling of the house, he walked around till he come to the door. We had electricity in gate at that time, and we one little bulb. And I turned it on, and it was just like a match. It was so dark in the house. And when that first come in, it was just as black as could be. And it went on. There were, now that was the day that the original black dust storm. But we had dust and dirt, and the dirt would blow till you couldn't, in town, you couldn't see your neighbor a block away. And a sweep of a morning, we had coal scuttle, and I'd maybe get a fourth of a coal scuttle full of this fine dirt when I'd sweep the house. And a lot of them had pneumonia, but...
Well, did you see this a-coming?
No,
Well,
I was in the house.
We could see it a-coming on up there, about 200 or 300 yards. And it was just rolling like this, and just about that high. But as soon as that hit in behind it, then it was just clouds. It was just turned black. But right in front of it, you could see it just rolling like that. We could see it coming before it ever hit to us.
That was up here on the ranch.
And that's the reason I told you I'd never seen any pictures and everything, and it don't look like nothing like it was. But of course, as soon as it hit us, we couldn't see it. You just couldn't keep your eyes open. That's what it was.
How'd you breathe in those dust storms?
You just breathe.
You just breathe. Some of them put cloths over their mouth, and you would hang up sheets, especially if there were people ill. You would dampen a sheet and hang it up by the doors and windows. Tell him how you got in.
Well, there's about 8 of us out there, and we was random in the crowd. We seen this coming. By the time we got the fire out, somebody said, "Well, turn the cattle out of the chute." And so the rest of us trying to get that fire out before it hit. And we crawled over this chute. There must have been 8 or 10 of us. Crawled over the chute and left one cow down in the chute. We just couldn't see her in the chute. And then we made it to the barn after we got to the barn.
Tell him how you got to the
barn. I wanted to make it to the bunkhouse. So we got a saddle rope, and everyone got a hold of the saddle rope. And we missed the bunkhouse. But the light plant was running down here. I turned it on that morning, had it running. And we got down south of that, we knew where we was at. And so we backed up to that light plant. And then we could go right straight back to the bunkhouse. But if we hadn't, we'd have got separated from that if we hadn't took that rope and everybody hung on to it. Because you couldn't see, you just couldn't keep your eyes. You just like closing your eyes and walking, that's just the way it was.
What is dust pneumonia?
Well, it's in breathing this, it goes onto your lungs, I imagine, just like the filter for your cigarettes. And you have a cold and you get this on there and your lungs won't function. And now they, well, during the, that is, this was back in when they flew. And at that time, they had so much flu. You see, that was a terrible winter. The snow was so deep. Well, they took the wheels off when the railroad come through. They took the wheels off of the wagon boxes and put boards on them for our kids. And they treated those with, they used axle grease. One thing that there's an old doctor here that treated about 550 some cases. And one thing, there was an old man that would go out and he would take 2 pounds of axle grease and put some turpentine in it, what was a tablespoonful or 2, and then if it could, there was hard to get eggs because the chickens weren't laying, but a white of eggs, and then they would take the oilcloth from a table. You see, they used oilcloth on the tables, and put that over them, and then put this axle grease on there and a cloth over that, and then they would take the lids from your stove and they would be hot and put on that, the heat on that, and that's one way they treated them. But this old doctor handled so many. He lived out in the country, and he had 2 means of transportation, either horseback or a buggy. And if he went horseback, he'd go from one ranch to the other, and of course he'd change horses there and take a new horse and go on to take care of his patients. And in the buggy, of course, he had a bare overcoat, and then he'd put bricks in there and go that way. But he liked to go horseback because he had hounds and he could hunt coyotes.
Cross country, is that a way?
And cross country. And but the doctor would come and, well, treat you the best he could. The doctors, after the word got out that he had only lost 3 patients and had had 550 some cases, the word got out that of him, and they'd write and ask him how he took care of it. And he said how he treated dust pneumonia, and he said just take pneumonia, and he said just take care of the patient, let the take care of the patient, let the flu go to hell.
Huh.
And that's,
Well, he said he could doctor any typhoid fever with a gallon of buttermilk and a barrel of water.
he had typhoid fever.
And I believe it too, because he sure as hell starved me.
And what did he do for it?
Huh? A gallon of buttermilk and a barrel of water
That was his saying. But you see,
for the typhoid fever.
Yeah.
you couldn't eat anything, and that was the main thing. Kid come along, tried to get him to eat some popcorn, but he
I turned him down. I don't know how I happened to do it. It was hungry as I was.
said it killed him, but the lining just goes out of your intestines.
Yeah.
You don't, it's just,
Just warm scabs right on your intestines. So you're not going to walk it. You're going. Couldn't eat anything on it what would go through
a stringer.
2 thickness of cloth.
Yeah. What about floods in this part of the country?
Well, there's one come down that summer one up there, that 21-foot wall of water.
21.
21 foot.
Good Lord.
It hit what I mean, that's wiped out haystacks, buildings and everything.
Cattle.
That team of horses, what's Spain had, wasn't it? They went down the river about 2 miles before they come out.
This Mr. Burns up here said they were now this one I think was only about 8 foot wall of water, or 13. There was different ones, you know. We didn't have any soil conservation terraces and ponds and things like that. And if they'd have a flood or the snow melting in the mountains, these rivers were rivers then.
Yeah.
They weren't like they are now. And the kids across there, and they just, someone saw it coming and was motioning them, and before they got across the river, they were in water up to their shoulders.
They all get out?
Yes. They were across there playing, and this man was on a horse, I think, and he saw this wall of water coming and began to holler and wave, and these kids came to him, and before they got to him.
I seen a boy putting 2 foot of water come down that shimmer room, and it just rolling like this. And it just straight up, looked like straight up and down, just rolling.
Now you have. There was a family that lived near the Beaver River, and it was getting out of the banks and all, and it's getting near their house. And this man's brother was a house mover, and they went down and moved that house out, and was bringing it out. The water had got up to it when they come out, and the wife stayed in there and baked her bread while they moved the house out. Moved it on higher ground.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, how did you serve food in those dust storms?
We just served it,
Yeah,
and
served it.
if it was dusted with dirt, well, you ate it.
There'd be dust fogging in the house, and you go out and eat. You didn't pay any attention to it.
What about storms like tornadoes or?
We have, well, there was one that came through the edge. Well, this was a twister and then hail. And it blew the windmills down, and well, it hailed until it knocked the bark off a post and put our cattle through the fence, and they came to the house. They were in a pasture a quarter mile away, and they came through the fence and came to the house. And we were harvesting. And this storm, they had tried to harvest that morning to combine, and it was damp, and it was clogging up on them, and they were working on their machine out in the field, and they saw this, and it went around and come in from the northwest. It started at the east, and my husband came in, and he had a pickup, and this was small combine, 7 foot, so, and he had was dumping in. We had a big barn, and he was dumping in the west end of the barn. But this storm was coming in, and he said when he drove the pickup in the yard, the dog went in. We had a shed off, and he drove the pickup in there, and the dog went under it, and he thought it was a pretty good idea, so he went under the pickup, and it took 20 foot of the north or the west side of the barn off, and this wheat we had 300 bushel in there was swimming with water, and that's when it just tore up everything, and we had to go uptown to get water, and they were building, that was in 40, I guess, because they were building the REC lines, and they had just put in some. We had a low place about 1.5 miles from us, and it took out 8 poles, 8 of those new REC poles. And our wheat, we had probably one of the best crops, and it beat it till you wouldn't find a dozen heads.
Stick up about that high.
Well, or not that high.
And another over here somewhere.
Well, it just the stalk, not a whole head, not a whole stalk, but just part of it. And then it rained until it washed the wheat right up where the roots were, and you could just look down there, and there was just rows and rows of wheat on the ground. It had beat it out, you see, and then the water had washed it up against the roots.
Were you able to save most of it?
Oh no, none of
Saved
it.
nothing.
You didn't save none of that. And it washed the straw down and hailed, and there was next day there was still hail in the places where this had washed in culverts.
Barges and stuff.
Did you all do any work for the WPA or CCC?
I didn't.
What'd you do?
Oh, loaded slips.
Slips. What are slips?
Well, they're, I don't know, what, they're 6 foot. You put 4 head of horses on them, and they would dump. You slide them along and load them, and then tilt them down, and go where you want the dirt, where you dump it up, and it scatters it out.
Was that road work or what?
Yeah, that's road work. I worked right south of the gate down there. think it worked only a week.
Well, probably not. But my mother run the sewing room. And these women would come in and make clothing for, and then they'd take their scraps and make quilts. But she operated the sewing room. But I was teaching school.
What were y'all doing on Pearl Harbor Day? December 7th, 41.
We had a little radio, and we got that on the radio. Well, just regular work.
That's as far as I can figure it out, we just worked. We didn't.
Was that Sunday?
Sunday, December 7th.
Oh, that didn't make no difference, Sunday or not, but I was working.
What you all do during World War II? Do any work for the war effort?
Well, we were on a farm. I was raising turkeys and chickens and milking cows, and my husband was in the garage, and we were operating, the Ford tractor, one year we operated 400 acres of wheat and maize and things like that. And you see, it took us most of the time. He would get up early every morning and go to the field, and then I would milk the cows and feed the turkeys and chickens. We bought a quarter of land, and I was raising these turkeys to finish paying. When he came back from World War I, he had got a day extra for his work in the Army of Occupation. And that's where we started a dairy and bought 160 acres. His pay, a check, I think, was $550, and we took the $49.50. We took the $49.50 and added 50 cents to it, and bought us 4 little Jersey heifers and a little Jersey bull. And then my mother had some cows, and I borrowed some of the neighbors, and milked cows and peddled butter, and started in raising turkeys, and I milked the cows, and the cows would pay for the turkey feed, and then when they sell the turkeys, why, that would pay the rent on that. But on this, he would get up and go to the field and work till about 11. Well, I'll do the chores, and then I would go out and take the tractor till about 2. He'd come in and eat his dinner and rest, and then I'd come in and rest a little while, and then I'd do all the chores. And then at about 9 o'clock, I'd go out and take the tractor and run it till 2 or 3 the next morning, as long as I could. And that's the way we operated. And had hogs and cows and chickens, and I sold eggs to the hatchery at Alva, because they had a hatchery over there, and they were buying hatching eggs, and I had to raise the chickens, and then they'd ship in these fancy cockerels from Washington State and places like that. And then they'd pick up the eggs.
And what's your husband's name?
Earl.
Earl Kerns, and he was in World War I?
One.
What did he do in the war?
Now wait a minute, was with, Wagner was his title. It was horse-drawn sea. And he was his commanding officer. He was his right-hand man. He went with him. He carried the mail. He took care of his officer's horse and things like that.
Did he go overseas?
Oh yes, he was 18 months.
How many battles was he in?
4 major battles.
Did he ever talk about the battles he was in?
No, you didn't.
He didn't talk much.
He didn't talk. The only way I learned much about it was get 2 of the soldiers together, and then they would discuss. Well, say Mayhill or Strathatheria, Buella Woods, or the Oregon Forest, and that's the way.
What did you hear him talk about the war?
Well, he told one story that they had been sleeping in a wagon, and they had taken these horses over with them, and I'm getting 2 stories together here. One of them was a gray horse. Well, they didn't want gray horses in the Army, but they would tie their horses to the wagon, and then they'd sleep in this wagon. And this particular night, for no reason whatsoever, they went to a cave. and a bomb hit that wagon. And of course, none of them was hurt. He came back. He had a little gas, but other than that, he wasn't injured. But I did hear him say one time, he said you'd be out on the battlefield and those bullets, and he said they always sounded like just about knee high, and they were just whizzing all around you, and you didn't know what to do. Or, of course, they dug the trenches and went into the trenches.
Well, we seen him and Artie got to talking up there one time. They was within 30 feet of each other and never did know it.
They had enlisted together and went in the Army together, and he was sent to North Carolina, and I don't know where Artie was, but this happened over there.
They got to talking about it, and Artie was a truck driver, and he said that they took, what was it, 7 or 8 trucks to get this one truck up this hill where they was firing the cannon from. He got up there and fired 3 rounds and had to come back. Artie said, hell, I could have carried him up there on my shoulder. Quicker than that. But they just put them trucks running right in behind the oven, you see. And they took, I think he said, 6 or 8 of them to put them up there. He said they got up there and fired 3 rounds. But I heard them there talking down there that there's machine guns lined up here for a half a mile. They'd start with this and they'd just fire down the line. By the time this got to the end here, this one started again. For a half a mile, just hub to hub. Yes, sir. But him and Artie talked about that. They was within 30 feet when there was one of the horses that got struck by a shell. And he said her inside was all dragging on the ground. They had to kill her. And that's when they come up and said, well, Artie said, where was you? And he said, sitting on that tin whistle. Right there beside the road. Artie said, well, I was in 3 feet of you. Not 3 feet, 20 feet of you.
This white horse is the only one that came back.
It is.
Well, they didn't want no white horses. They took him over and
that was the one that they brought back. Took them 13 days to go over and 13 days to come back.
And that horse went out here to Colorado, wasn't it?
I don't remember.
That
Earlier it didn't talk.
they had no white horse out there. It come back over the sea. I believe that was the horse.
What about that flu epidemic, 1918?
Oh, that was terrible. Father took us out of school. He thought he'd take us out and out to the farm. We had a farm, and that's where the boys were staying and milking the cows and all of that. And we were driving 5 miles. Part of the time, we rode horseback, 2 of us on each horse, and went into school. And then we'd go in a lumber wagon. And finally, we graduated to a Model T in several years. But he took us out of school and took us out there on the farm. I missed a year of school because of that. Thought maybe we wouldn't get it. And oh, the snow was terrible. That's when you couldn't hardly, well, the wagon box would drag when the horses would go along. And but we all had it, and Father and the hard hand were the ones that had it the worst. They had pneumonia, and they had us turning them every 30 minutes. And just as this old doctor said, he just took care of the patient. He tried to keep the temperature down, and he had croup so much. And the way he treated him, he'd take a pan of water and put some carboxylic acid in it, and then put a brick in there, you see, and then put a tent over him, and he would steam him, and that would take care of his croup or lung trouble. It just...
Slim Doc rode down there to the phone to call him. That's what he told him.
What he told him. You see, he couldn't make all of these, but they would call him, and he'd tell them they'd tell him the shape he's in, and then use your home remedies a lot.
What kind of home remedies did you use?
Oh, well,
Alcohol, carbolic acid.
And, just what I've told you along here with the castor oil, of course, and Epsom salts for sores. Soak them in Epsom salts or salt water. Mother has, and I had migraine headaches, and she would take, they were so severe, she would take salt and put red pepper in it and vinegar and make a poultice and put on her head and blister her head. That was the relief that she got. But just whatever you could hear of or someone suggest.
Yeah.
But this old man just went from home to home, and he would come out and stay. He'd just sit up night and day and put those poultices on that, and then he'd change these lids and put them on there and turn the patients and feed them soup.
Wool cloth.
Yes,
sulfur. And a red hot coal in a can.
that was for blood poison.
Yeah, that's what he used on my
Red hot coal in a can?
Yeah.
All right, go ahead and tell him how they did it.
Well, she just put a wool cloth in the bottom of a can, and then sprinkle sulfur on it, and then go get a hot coal out of the gun, the red hot coal, and set that in there and put it in. I stepped on the nail and here, and it pushed the hide up over here. It went clear through. And boy, that was giving me. It wasn't 15 minutes after she put my foot over that.
See, he had put his foot over that and let that steam come up.
And just around that hole, it turned kind of a sulfur color. Right around where that nail that went up in there, it just made a circle around that. And I never had more trouble. I think she doctored it twice with that.
Just wool and sulfur and hot coal.
Mm-hmm. And, well, they used wool cloths, a lot of them on their chests, too. Yeah. And this skunk oil and sulfur, wasn't it? Turpentine.
Yeah, we used a lot of turpentine.
And kerosene.
Mm-hmm. Kerosene is good. I took kerosene and sugar.
Yes, and turpentine and sugar. Put a drop or two of turpentine on the sugar and eat it.
Did many people die in that flu epidemic around here?
3. One of them, this old doctor was down at Ralston, which is about 8-10 miles from us, and he was down there treating the family. They were all sick, and the mother was up taking care of them. And he just said to her, he says, if you don't get to bed and take care of yourself, you'll be dead. Next morning, she was dead. And then there was an old man, and when he got sick, he just knew he was going to die, and that's all you could get out of him, and he did die. And then there was a retarded boy. Now, that is the 3 cases that this old doctor lost.
What started that flu? Where'd it come from?
That's a $64 question. Of course, it wasn't extremely bad winter. The snow like that deep and cold, and it was just a bug, I guess, that came in because you see so many of the men in the service died with that.
Someone told me that it came back from Europe with the soldiers.
Well, now, I wouldn't know. I couldn't answer that question. I was just a teenager.
Yeah. Next question I want to ask. In the 30s, did many people go to California?
Oh,
This area?
yes. It was just only the hardy ones that stayed, and they were the only one. Now they're the ones that come out. Now, we, as I had told you, we couldn't get any money, and my husband was working, and we went down to Arkansas. He had relatives down there, and he had a cousin at Pittsburgh that had a garage, and he could have got work, $18 a week. Well, we went down there, and we canned a lot of fruit and vegetables while we were down there. He had an aunt, and took a load of furniture to a man that was in the mortuary business at Alva, and then went on and then brought back a truckload of canned fruit and vegetables from Arkansas that we didn't have up here. But I said to him, Well, we could live on the $18 a month. We could manage. But I said, we're living at home. Let's go home where our friends are, and we could just come home and toughed it out. And we saved this check back that he had gotten. We didn't use it because we wanted that as an investment, and that was where he invested in this quarter of land. He said he didn't know which was the worst, when he gave up his saving, this bond that the government had given him, or the old man that gave up his homestead. When he signed it over, they both felt bad about what they did, but then we still had, or I still have the farm because I paid it out raising turkeys. I'd raise the turkeys and he'd take them to market, and every bit of that money would go on the mortgage until it was paid.
Well, what else you want to talk about?
Well, I have traveled, well, we both have. I have traveled quite a bit. I worked for the Oklahoma Farm Bureau on this Oklahoma Farm Bureau Women's Committee for 28 years.
What'd you do there?
I was a state committee woman. I represented the 7 northwestern counties out here, the Panhandle and Ellis and Dewey and Woodward and Harper, and organized Farm Bureau women and carried the program out. This Mr. Boats that died today, he was one of the directors, and Mr. Deck from out in this area, and I was on the women's committee. And we collected information. We attended all training schools and conventions and brought back the message and carried it to the rural people, help organize, sell membership, and carried on our program. And then I represented, went to the tri-conference of the Associated Country Women of the World. You know, that meets, and it was in Dublin, Ireland, and we had traveled to the British Isles there. And then I went with Russell Pearson on, and his national broadcasters to Europe. And I was in Cuba right at the time that Castro took over. We were down there, had gone to Miami for a convention and went on over to Cuba and spent a few days there.
What was Havana? Were you in Havana?
Yes.
What was Havana like when he was taken over?
Well, it's just a city of cemeteries. We got in there, and there was a holiday the next day, and all of these little cabbies were wanting to take us places, and they said they'd take us to, some of them went to a winery and to experiment farms, and honest to goodness, they'd have 2 or 3 pineapple plants and little bitty things that didn't amount to anything. But I never saw so many cemeteries in my life. See, they couldn't bury them below, and here they were, and they just take you from cemetery to cemetery. They'd want to take you here and there to get our money. And no, it was a mess. Now, as we came back, they shook us down, of course, went through all of our luggage, and going over, I just had a train case, didn't bother me much, but the women that had suitcases, they had to go down and open them up for inspection and coming out. We went over on a boat and flew back to Miami.
Well, I think we've had a good interview.
Well, it's been here, there, and everywhere. And I don't know what you've learned or what.
Quite a bit. I want to thank you.
Well, surely, and thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Listen.
Stagner Reiswig, put my maiden name in.
Stagner, Reiswig?
Yeah, Stagner was
Okay.
my maiden name.
This is September 13th, 1984. I'm Joe Todd, and we're interviewing Esther Stagner Reiswig. How you spell your last name?
R-E-I-S-W-I-G.
German.
Yes, sir.
Where were you born?
Where was I born? I
Yeah.
was born in Clinton, Oklahoma,
And when's your birthday?
April the 29th, 1915.
Who's your father?
Charles Stagner. Charles E. Stagner.
And your mother?
Elsie Clark. Elsie Mae Clark. Stagner.
Who are your folks from?
My mother was from Missouri, and my father came from, I'm not sure if he came from southern Missouri or in that area though. Mother was from northern Missouri.
Okay. What kind of work did your father do?
My natural father was a minister and a farmer. He was killed when I was 15 months old. I don't remember him at all.
Yeah. What about your stepfather?
My stepdad came from Oregon. Well, he was born, my stepdad was born over in around Elgin, Kansas. And then he moved to Oregon, and he lost his wife, and he came back and met my mother with us 3 kids, and he had 4 kids. And they got married and had 1 kid.
What was his name?
Lambert Victor Noe.
As a little girl, what kind of chores did you do around the farm?
Oh. The one I hated the most was getting that tub, old beat up tub, and tying a rope on it, and, or a string or something, and going out in the pasture and picking up cow chips. Every night after school, if it was dry, regardless of whether it was summer or winter, we had to have a supply of cow chips. They burned fast and hot, made lots of ashes, so we had to carry them out about as fast as we carried them in. But we had fun, us kids. Carried.
Where were you living at that time?
I was living down in the Blue Mound community in the half dugout, adobe, and then Mother had had another house built onto the adobe house that was another adobe. So we had the 2 adobe houses joining together.
Tell me about the adobe half dugout. Who built it? Why was it built?
My father, maybe I ought to start clear back when Grandpa and Grandma came to.
Yeah. Okay.
Grandpa Clark came to Oklahoma in 1908 from Harrisonville, Missouri. He came to Beaver County, Oklahoma with lots of nerve. He brought 4 teenage girls to that community of bachelors. They came from Missouri on an immigrant train. Mama and the kids rode in one coach, bringing the cows and horses and the dog, and I don't know if they brought chickens or not, probably did. But it was required by law that somebody ride with them. By the time they got all the animals on the train car and the tank, water tank, there wasn't any place for Grandpa Clark to be, so he rode to Liberal, Kansas in the stock tank. I always laughed about that. I thought that was funny. Then they got off the train at Liberal and unloaded everything, and had to stay in a hotel overnight. And people from the Blue Mound community, J.M. Zooks and John Brants, and I'm not sure who all else, but they took their wagons. They had to start the day before to go up and get them. And they would go as far as the Beaver River, cross the river, and on the north side of the river was a camp. So they would camp there overnight and stay at that little place. And I've forgotten the name of it. I don't think it was Dombey, but I'm not sure. And then they would go on into Liberal. They picked up the grandpa and grandma and all the supplies that they could carry. I doubt if they got everything at one time, but anyway, they picked them up and then they'd go back to this camp and stay overnight again, and then on in to Blue Mound the next day. So it was quite a trip, and this is the way they did for getting supplies. And always there was more than one person went. There were several that went together as a group. Then Grandpa moved, got his onto the land that he was homesteading, and right next door there was another piece there that somebody had homesteaded on illegally. So Charlie Stagner was wanting a piece of ground, so he found this out, and he got on his horse and headed for the land office at Woodward. I don't know how far he would go, but I estimate that a horse could have made the trip halfway to Woodward before he'd have to stop. Anyway, he made it to Woodward the next morning and had gone into the land bank and did all the legal work and got the papers signed, and was leaving the building when he met another man that was coming in to file on the same piece of ground. But my father beat him to it by just a little bit. And that was right next door to Grandpa Clark's quarter. And
Why was the guy illegal on the homestead?
Either his mother had, his family already had a quarter, or he wasn't old enough. I think maybe the mother had filed on 2 quarters and put his name on one, rather than him filing himself. I'm not just sure how it was, but anyway, there was something there that wasn't quite right, and they had to open it up again for somebody to homestead.
Also, I was going to ask, what is an immigrant card on the train?
That was a law that immigrants going, now it was just a regular train, but the law was immigrant could go by train for a lot less price, and they were allowed to take all their animals, all their belongings, to move on this immigrant train. I don't think the train looked any different than the old trains did, but they may have had different kind of coaches too. The bachelors in the community, after Grandpa Clark got settled, the bachelors in the community would shine up their horses and curry them all up and make them real pretty and polish their harness and dust their buggies and shine them up, and they'd go up and down that mile, back and forth, several of them at a time. And evidently some of them got nerve enough to stop, because there were 4 bachelors got him a bride at Grandpa's house. And one of them was my mother. And I laughed about the kids nowadays run up and down Main Street. Well, times really haven't changed. It just wasn't many houses for to travel up and down. And Papa then, he wanted to, he knew he was going to have a bride, so he busied himself. He took a 6 by 12 frame, 6 by 12 by 12, and he started digging out, and as he dug, he made mud and poured the adobes in these frames, and they sun-dried, and as they dried, they pulled away from the frame, and he could lift the frame off and let them sit there and keep on drying, and then the next day he could mix up some more. And he kept doing this until he had enough to make a 2-room half dugout. And that was big, because most of them just had the 1 room. And it was different because he made his adobes 12 by 12 by 6. Most of them made them 12 by 6 by 6. They just cut in half. And they're a stronger adobe, and they're still standing. I used to wonder, well, where did he get the dirt to make the adobes? I was a kid, and I wondered, and there was never any holes around the yard, and I couldn't figure where he got all the dirt. Of course, we were living in that hole. the half dugout, see, as he used the dirt out of the dugout, he made adobes, and when he got through, he had enough to put up on top. The dugout's still standing, and it still has the little curved roof like all adobes have.
When was it built?
Must have been 1910 or 1909, because they were married in 1910.
Where's that located?
From the Balko school, Balko town, would be 6 miles south and 1.5 miles west, 1 3/4 west. My stepfather was worried that the building was going to, it was washing, the rain was washing the adobe some, and the ends of the boards over this little rounded roof were getting so beat up, and the tar paper had come off of them, and so he cut off about 1 foot or more on that roof top, and then he stuccoed the outside of the adobe. So the adobe has been protected over the years because of the stucco that my stepdad put on there.
How large are the 2 rooms?
Maybe 15 by 15 or 15 by 18. The kitchen had a cabinet in a corner, and then we had our stove, and then on one end was a cupboard, the other end was a washstand, and then we had our oval table there that we all sat down to eat. And the bedroom in the next room was the bedroom, and it was large enough that you could go the length of the bed plus about 3 feet at the end. And then Mother had a trundle bed underneath, and it would pull clear out. And there was a chest of drawers, and then she always had her sewing machine in there, and then there was a trunk that they kept in there. So it must have been about 18, I'm not sure. Never thought about how big were the rooms.
What was the inside of the walls? Were they
The
covered?
inside of the walls were covered with plaster, or stucco type plaster with, I think it had some cement in it. And the ceiling was kind of, I called it cardboard type stuff. But it was pliable enough that it curved and fit the curvature of the roof. And the windows, of course, see, were a foot deep. And the window was set back, toward the outside. And so the window wasn't too far from the screen. So all this extra space was on the inside. Mom always kept flowers in there. And then in the summertime, when we'd open the window, they'd swing up on a hinge, and they couldn't swing clear up because of that framework. So Dad had a wire fastened to the ceiling with a screen door type hook that would come down and hook into the window and hold it open. And then in the summertime, Mother always had a gallon can with cream or butter or something in it, with a plate on the bottom, a saucer on the top, and a dish towel or something wrapped around it. And she kept water in the top, and it run down, and as the wind blew through it, it kept it from souring. So that was her refrigerator.
How was that half dugout for insulation? Was it?
Oh, it was great. It was warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And it was real quiet. You didn't hear a lot of outside noises through that thick wall. And there was no draft coming in. And around the windows, now when my stepdad stuccoed it, he made sure there wasn't any place for wind to come in around the windows. And it wasn't hard to heat. The cook stove heated both rooms. And in the summertime, people would come to visit Mother, and even the adobe house that was built up on the ground. Our house was the coolest in the community because of the thick walls, I guess.
Now, was it just one block thick, so the walls were 12 inches thick?
Yeah.
How long did you live in that half dugout?
Till I went away to school. 18 years. We all grew up in it.
How many kids?
Well, now my dad's kids didn't grow up in it. Lewis and Leslie were high school age when Mom and Daddy got married, but he had a girl that was 3 months older than I, and then he had a brother. My brother was 18 months younger than I, and then Dad's boy, Warren, was 14 months younger than Levi. So there was the four of us, his two and Mama's two. We were just about the same age, and we all grew up in the adobe dugout. And then my little brother, our half brother, was 10 years younger. He grew up in it. And it hasn't been not occupied for until Mother had to go to a nursing home. So the folks had to move to town. It has been occupied. We rented it out until just, maybe 5 years ago. My brother, the adobe that was up on the ground fell, just about went to pieces. So my brother and a contractor went down, and Mom had a 2-bedroom house built up there, a frame house. And then my brother has moved that to Fowler. But it's been occupied, been used.
How do you...
And I never remember having a dirt floor in the dugout.
Yeah.
So my father must have put a wooden floor in when he built the dugout.
Yeah. How do you fit 5 kids and 2 adults?
Pretty thick. Faye and Thelma and I, the 3 of us, always slept together. Levi and Dutch slept together. Lewis and Leslie slept together. And Mom and Daddy slept together. And then we still had the trundle bed. My half brother slept in the trundle bed.
So you had, what, 4 beds?
Well, we had a folding bed in the living room, and then there was a folding bed out in the wash house. The wash house is still standing, and on the end of it is the coal shed that we had to keep full of cow chips because we couldn't afford to buy coal. Dad would, after Mom and Dad married, then Dad would get about a ton of coal, and that had to last us all winter long. And we just used it very sparingly.
Where'd you start school?
Blue Mound.
Blue Mound. How big was the school?
Oh, we thought we had a big school. We had 4 rooms. We went clear through high school. And then they built the newer schoolhouse, and that was 8 rooms with an enclosed gym, inside gym, and that was quite something.
How many years you go to school?
Altogether or at Blue Mound?
Altogether.
Well, I graduated with a master's degree.
Where'd you go to
And
college?
actually, I've been in education most of my life.
Where'd you go to your undergraduate work?
I did that at Alva.
Alva. What year
At
did you go to-
Northwestern State.
What year did you go to school there?
37 to 41.
What was it like going to Alva in the Depression, going to school there?
Well, I worked. I didn't know any different. We just, wherever you were, you had to work.
What kind of work you did?
I worked in the school library. I worked I went on weekends when people would have parties or need somebody to clean house or something. I did that. And I worked at Penny's, and I worked at a cafe in town. And wherever I could find work, that's what I did.
Did you?
And then NYA came in, and I moved into a dormitory and started working in the cafeteria there.
Was
And
the NYA program?
That was the Roosevelt program, went
Yeah.
along with WPA. And National Youth Administration, probably.
Was it mainly for kids to go to college on, or?
Mainly, yes.
Yeah.
And there was a bunch of us. We had our separate cafeteria from the rest of the college kids. I don't know how come, but we did.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was it organized anything like WPA, the NYA program?
I think it must have been.
Okay. Who did you report to in the NYA program?
Forgot his name. Seems like it was Hessler. What was his? And Graves was there for a while.
Now, were they part of the school, or were they?
No, they were administrators some way. Being a green country kid, I didn't know.
What did you study at Alva?
Oh, I always wondered. When I was in the 2nd grade, I don't know why, but I had a teacher, and I made up my mind that I was going to be an elementary school teacher.
What was her name?
Catherine Tasier. She's still living. She didn't get to come to our Blue Mound reunion, but I've talked to her several times on the phone.
Where does she live?
She lives in Texaco, New Mexico.
Mm.
She married the 3rd year. Her name was Catherine Berlin. But when she made an impression on me, and I wanted to be an elementary school teacher, so that's what I majored in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you graduated from high school in what year?
1934.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Blue Mound for 3 years. And then I had an opportunity to go to a Bible school at Tabor Highway. And it was called Hepzibah Faith Mission Home or something like that. I forget what. But they had grade school and high school and then a 2-year Bible course. And I went up with these same Zooks that helped move Grandpa Clark from Liberal to Blue Mound. I went up there, and Mr. Zook was one of the administrators in this school, and I stayed in their home and went to school, finished high school there, and then I stayed 2 more years and took the 2-year Bible course. An interesting thing happened, though. I was a junior when I left Blue Mound. My stepsister stayed at Blue Mound, and she graduated the next year. Because I went from Oklahoma to Iowa, my stepsister got to graduate, and I didn't. I had to have 18 credits instead of 16. So I had to take a 2nd year to get my high school diploma at Tabor. So I didn't get to graduate from high school until 1934. Then I went ahead and stayed there the 2 years and took the Bible course. Then I went to Gravette, Arkansas, and taught school, 1st, 2nd, 3rd grades in their little Bible school. And I found out that I really did want to teach elementary. So my brother was already in school at Alva, and he said, well, sis, if you're going to teach, why don't you just come over here and go to school so you can have a certificate and teach? So I did, and he had an apartment, and I went and stayed with him, and he helped me to get started. We had friends there that lived on farm, and they'd bring us milk, and so we managed to survive. And he had a job, and I had a job. So between us, we managed until the next year. Then when I got on NYA, then I went to stay in the dormitory. And I went to college a year, and then the 2nd year I was in college, they called me in and they says, hey Esther, guess what? And I said, what? And they said, your high school diploma is not accredited. And I didn't have 15 hours from Blue Mound, 15 credits. So I said, well, what do I do now? They said, well, you're going to have to get an accredited high school diploma. And I said, well, what does that mean? Do I have to go to Horace Mann? And they said, well, you're going to have to enroll in high school and get those 4 credits, at least 15. And I said, well, I just well get 4 and get another high school diploma. So they let me go ahead and take Latin 1 and 2 at the college that I had when I was in Tabor. Then I went over to Horace Mann with the high school kids, and I took my English and math over there. And then I took a class in speech at the college that was high school credit. And I graduated from high school again. So not many people graduate from high school after you've gone to college a year and a half. Or graduate from high school twice. But then I went ahead then with my college work. It didn't discourage me, and I don't know how come it didn't. It didn't discourage me in the least. It just was part of it, you know. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did. And I liked it. I enjoyed college. It was fun. It was work, but it was fun. I never did couldn't take more than 12 to 14 hours because I worked that much, so much that I didn't have time to study.
Right. Tell me about the dust storms.
Dust storms were terrible.
Describe them. Were you here for Black Sunday?
No. But my husband Ralph was out in that.
What were they like, the dust storms?
They were, if you forget about the devastation and just look at the clouds, the formation of the dirt come boiling in, it was beautiful. It was colorful. It had reds and yellows and the dark blue color and various colors, and it rolled like you had a bunch of balls, one on top of the other, and they were all rolling. They didn't all roll the same direction. It just looked like they were stacked one on top of the other. This one's rolling here, this one's rolling here, this one over here is rolling this way, and it was just straight up, just almost perpendicular to the ground.
How high would it be?
Oh, you could see above it till it hit you. Maybe 1,000 feet. And the birds couldn't get over it, or they didn't. The birds flew in front of it. It was just like there was a net behind them pushing the birds. And the birds all tried to stay ahead of it. And when that thing hit, sometimes there was real hard wind in it, sometimes there wasn't. It just moved in silently. And it would just be just as dark as pitch. Now, not every storm was as dark, so dark that you couldn't see anything at all. But that Black Sunday, you couldn't even see the windows. It was so black.
What made that storm so different? Why was it that way?
It must have been more static electricity in the air, and it must have had black dirt instead of red and white, and the colors that I was describing.
How did you breathe in a dust storm?
Well, you stayed in the house, and you covered the doors with blankets, quilts, homemade quilts, bedspreads, tablecloths, sheets, whatever you could find to put over the doors where the dirt was coming in and the windows around the cracks and stuff. Mother always kept the cracks all poked full. See, our clothes would wear out, and she'd strip it, and she'd take a knife, she'd poke strips of cloth all around the facings of the windows on the outside and clear up in around by the window itself. And in between where the two windows separated, where you raise one up, she always kept that packed full of rags. And then in the summertime, she'd open that one out so that she could put the window up and down for circulation. But the rags in the other places always stayed poked. And the only papers we took was the Capper's Weekly and Kansas City Star, so there wasn't enough paper that she could fold and stick in there. And she said that the cloth would bend better to the contour of the plaster that was on the walls and the contour of the wood. Of course, she didn't use the word contour, but she said it would fit in there better. And she'd just take a table knife and stick the rag over it and start poking it in until she got it all the way in, all the way down.
Did that keep most of the dirt out?
It did. But the dirt filled into people's attics, and years later, people's attics if they didn't get up there and clean the dirt out, the attic, the ceiling has fallen and made a new dirt storm inside the house. And that's been pretty drastic. And people, even yet today, don't like to tear down an old house because it is full of blow dirt, even if they've gotten up there and tried to scoop it out. It's as fine as flour. And you take some flour that you make bread out of and rub it in your fingers. Blow dirt was that thin, that fine. It's just like God had sifted it all out, all the debris and everything. Real fine powder. And then sometimes after the dirt storms, then the countryside would be covered with either red, sometimes it'd be red dirt that was settled all over everything. Sometimes it'd be white dirt that had settled all over everything. And the cows, their hair, their backs looked funny, and I said, well, what's the matter with the cow's hair? And the hair on the dirt would settle on the cows' backs, and they couldn't seem to shake it off or something. It was getting the hair. and the dirt would become caked on the top of a cow's back, and sometimes just be a little bit of hair sticking through the dirt. And it didn't rain to wash it out, and I don't know if people ever tried to get the dirt out of the cow's hair or not. As far as I know, we just left it there. And the strange thing is, you know, we all lived through it, and nobody felt like they were any better than anybody else. We all had to wear worn out clothes. We had to, Mother would wash the flour sacks and get as much of the print out of them as she could, and then she made clothes out of those, and that was back when it was just white flour sacks with the print on them. And I don't think anybody in the country ever had any underwear that wasn't flour sack. All us girls went to school, all our panties were made out of flour sacks. And Mom made the boys' underwear out of flour sacks. Whatever they could find, and then we had calico and we had gingham that we could use. And we didn't need closets. Nobody had a closet. We didn't need them. We just had one or two dresses. You iron them, fold them up, put them in the dresser drawer, and that's all there was to it. We just had 2 or 3 pair of panties and 1 or 2 underskirts, and that all fit in a drawer very well. And then those horrible, horrible long socks. And then in the wintertime, there was those terrible long-legged underwear. Oh my. But everybody was in the same situation. We all knew we was poor, but we didn't know, wasn't anybody any poorer than anybody else, didn't seem like. Because everybody was just alike. And when the people talk about the good old days, it's not the word, it's not the hardships. They remember back in those days, everybody shared their joys and their sorrows. We washed on the board, we traveled in the buggy, but they had more time to visit, they had more time to care about their neighbors. They, on Sundays, we'd go home with this one Sunday, and then they'd come back to see us the next Sunday. Maybe the next Sunday would be someplace else or something like this. And people would get together and visit. And I told Mother, I said, I think it's a fact that everybody shared their joys and their sorrows. When Anderton's house burned down, that was tragic. They had 12 kids, and that house burnt to the ground. They couldn't save a thing. I don't think anybody was even home when it started burning. And the oldest girl came to our house to stay, and then some of the others went to different houses all over the whole community. And Lida was washing her hands in the wash pan, and she started crying. She said, "And just think, says we don't even have a wash pan anymore." And that just stuck with me, you know. Well, how would it be to be, you know, not have anything? She had no clothes. And everybody just pitched in. It wasn't too long till they had them a different house. People gave them clothes, made clothes, took them this, took them that. They had an extra table or was about to fall down. They repaired it and took it to them. And it wasn't such a disaster as it might be nowadays. Being alone is the biggest disaster. But people were never alone in those days. Even though they had, well, most of them had phones. But if they didn't, they still weren't alone. Somebody looked after them. They took care of each other. And that makes a lot of difference.
In 1941, you graduated from college.
No, I quit my junior year and went and started teaching.
Started teaching.
And then I married in 42. Oh no, I'm going to tell you something else first. In 1941, I was in the dormitory. In the fall of 41, I was still in the dormitory going to school. And on December the 7th, I was at the dormitory. December the 7th, 1941. And I mean to tell you, that campus was It was really upset because there were a lot of them had their boyfriends and all were in the service, and they knew when Pearl Harbor happened, they knew what was coming. And then in March is when I started teaching, and I taught. I didn't like to sew, so I took a minor in industrial arts. I liked woodworking, but I didn't like sewing. So I went to a little town of Capron, Oklahoma, just north of Alva, and I taught. This shop teacher had gotten a better job, and they needed somebody to teach. So they called me, and I went up there and finished out his year for him. And then I was going with a man from Allen, Oklahoma, Lester Hood. And I went to summer school. And Lester and I decided to get married. And we married on June the 7th of 42. Then he was drafted in October of 42. So we didn't even get to live through the first argument. And then he came home and I got pregnant, and I didn't get to see him until the baby was born. And I was sent him a telegram, and Dr. Answer came to me and he said, would you like to see Lester? And I said, yes, I would. And he said, well, he said, I'll tell you what? He said, if somebody comes in here and asks you how you are, he said, you're just real, real sick. I said, oh, am I? And he said, yeah. He said, you just tell him that you're just not doing so good. In about 2 days, Lester was there. So Dr. Answer had sent a telegram and told him that he needed to come. Had a baby girl, and he said, the guys asked him, said, well, what'd you name her? And he said, Elsa Fern. He said, how do you know that? Said, that was the name we decided on, so that's her name. And sure enough, it was. And I don't even remember what we picked out for a boy's name, because I could forget it, I guess. Charles Eugene. And then he came home and took us home from the hospital. Then he saw us again when Elsa Fern was 5 months old, and then we never saw him again. He was killed on Okinawa on June the 25th, 1945. I got the telegram, both telegrams, the week of final exams for summer school. And I knew I couldn't take the exams, and I knew I couldn't talk to them, because when I get to crying, I can't talk. So I just took the telegrams up and showed them to my professors. They said, that's fine, because you don't need to take them. So we had this little girl, and I had promised that I'd come out to Beaver to teach. And I didn't know if I could or not, so I wrote to H.E. Wilson, and I told him what had happened, and I said, I just don't think I can do it. And he wrote back, and he says, oh, yes, you can. He said, you need to worse than ever now. So I came on out to Beaver to teach, and then I met a former classmate that I'd gone to school with at Blue Mountain. Ralph Reiswig had come home from the service. He was in the European theater, was in the Air Force, and Ralph and I got to talking about Blue Mountain days, and the first thing he knew was going together. So he and I got married the next summer, and then he's the father of our two boys, Roy and Lawrence. So I've got a double family. Mother had a double one, so I guess I kind of followed in her footsteps.
Mm-hmm.
It's been very interesting. Been great.
Well, did you help with war effort any?
I made one chambray shirt, and that's all I made. I didn't like to sew, and it gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I just couldn't do it. And so they wanted us to knit, and I knitted and purled a piece Oh, I think it must have been a chain about 12 inches long or something. Then went back across it again, and yeah, it didn't get to be about an inch wide, and that's all, was all I ever did.
Got a question.